Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the ITL Network's Stikeman series. My name is Sanjana Arora, and today we have with us Barbara Sheng, who is a partner in the corporate group of Stikeman Elliott. Barbara is a member of several firm committees, including the Montreal office's Student and Strategies Committee, and Knowledge Management and Legal Innovations Committee. She is also co-chair of the National Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. With that, I would like to hand it over to Barbara to tell us a little about herself and her journey in the legal profession.
Thanks, Sanjana. So yes, I am Barbara Sheng. I am a partner in our corporate group at Stikeman Elliott in the Montreal office. I like to say that I kind of fell into law not knowing that this was exactly what I wanted to do. So when I graduated my first undergrad degree doing a majors in poli-sci and international development studies, I thought that I was going to travel abroad, work for an NGO, and save the world. And then at some point I did work for a governmental organization abroad, and I came home a little bit kind of, I guess, the naiveness had kind of disappeared, knowing that things would not change instantaneously overnight. So reapplied to go back to school, wanting something a little bit more concrete to be able to get my hands dirty. So applied to law school. Surprisingly, I got in. And then, at that point, just kind of continued working. I was working part-time at a bank, and then also doing my law school degree. And then shortly after that, I did my recruitment, and to my surprise, wasn't expecting, very much at that time, not knowing how much I was worth. But it turns out that, my grades got me very far, and as well as my work experience. So Stikeman had made me an offer, and I had accepted it. So I'm really lucky to have, given that opportunity to join the firm. Many of us call ourselves Stikeman babies, since, we start from being a student, articling student, and then a lawyer, and then, of course, today a partner. So.
This has been a very interesting journey, I must say, Barbara. So a little about yourself is that you practiced in New York. Can you tell us about some differences or similarities in terms of practicing in the US versus Canada?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because one of the ideas for me after I finished my first law school degree, given that it's a civil law degree in Quebec, I did think about doing a common law degree, just because I knew that I'd probably want to do more commercial transactions, and it would be helpful if I wanted to work outside of Quebec to have that common law degree. In the end, given that I felt like I was in school forever, I wanted to just, get into the job market and work right away. So I just started to work, but I always had that little itch I couldn't scratch of, wanting to work in New York and, live the big law lifestyle. And Stikeman, luckily has an office in New York, so I was given that opportunity. When I had expressed it to some of my, mentors, they had proposed it to me. They said, go and spend 6 months there. And obviously, we do have a secondment program. So once our lawyers are a little bit more autonomous and are able to lead their own files with very little supervision, we typically will send a few associates to New York to basically help, the business there. It's not a big office. It's a supporting office. So I was there as a M&A lawyer, helping the partners there with their files. And what we do is mainly Canadian law. We don't do American law. So we're really there just as Canadian advisors to our US based clients. And for me, it was a fantastic experience, because I was able to, be close to them, go out for lunch and grab drinks, attend cocktails more easily, and basically build on my network while, doing Canadian law, the Canadian law aspects of certain international transactions or US transactions. I think some differences is, if you look at, the comparable of Stikeman to, a US law firm, obviously, everything is greater in size. So the type of transactions that we do in Canada may seem already big, but it's even bigger in New York. And so the transactions are much larger, timelines are much tighter. So I think that, in terms of volume and type of work. It's a lot more tedious on these bigger transactions and larger transactions. Obviously, super exciting, fast paced. But I think the main difference that I see in Canada is maybe a smaller version of it, and I like to see it as the best of both worlds, since we get the interesting type of transactions without going completely overboard in terms of size, or it just seems like impossible to conquer, but always a lot of fun to do. So that's probably one of the main differences. And then obviously, the type of law that's being practiced as well. So there are some differences in terms of just general commercial concepts, but they are very similar. Just, we need to know the difference. I have to say that not having a common law degree didn't have that much of an impact, since a lot of what we learn is not from textbooks. It's really, we learn by doing. So I think that has been helpful in my journey, and I don't really look back and say, oh, I should have done my common law degree to get today. So
I think this is very interesting and informational for students or lawyers who are looking to work in US but pursue Canadian law. Another thing that we mentioned in the intro was that you are the co-chair of National Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee at Stikeman Elliott. Can you tell us a little more about your role?
Yep, sure. So basically, I think over a year ago, I was approached by the chair of the board at the time to sit on this new committee that we were trying to, I guess, reform with better, I guess, goals, objectives being set for the coming year. I took a lot of interest to it because it was something that was near and dear to me. And I think a lot of people don't really know my history as much as, in terms of on the diversity side. I'm fully bilingual. So a lot of people always question whether I'm more Anglophone or Francophone. And meanwhile, my parents don't really speak either English or French very well. So that was always something that was, something important to me in terms of growing up. And so when I was given the opportunity to be a co-chair with Natasha Bimji, it was a beautiful opportunity for us to get our ideas together with a lot of, resources. So really lucky to have that committee being set up. And then we pretty much divide into different subcommittees and subgroups. The committee comprises of lawyers, and non-legal members, partners across the entire firm. So we've got folks from our Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal offices that sit on this committee. It meets, I think, every 3 weeks, which is, a lot in the sense that, there's a lot going on. And we usually start off the meetings by kicking off and asking each one of the offices what they've done since our last meeting, just basically reporting. And we make sure that ideas are shared, resources are pulled together so that, anything that we do will benefit, the larger national office. And then we can get ideas together and share them between offices too. So that's pretty much been our role, is to basically overlook the committee, make sure that there is progress. We set the objectives and the goals, and we try to find ways to execute them as seamlessly as possible according to our timetable that we've formulated. So that's been a lot of fun.
So taking the last question a little further, we would like to hear from you what kind of programs or initiatives does the firm have in place with respect to outreach to the public or potential lawyers?
So I think what we try to attack DEI from different fronts. I like to say that, there is initiatives that we do internally in terms of, how do we recruit diverse lawyers? And then how do we also maintain them? So how do we ensure that we retain them and that they are actually growing in those leadership positions? But aside from that, we also do everything on the outside. So how do we get involved with the schools? We basically work with certain associations, certain universities, make sure that scholarships and opportunities are there. We try to remove those hurdles to make sure that, there's equal opportunities and access to higher education and legal education. So I think the main goals that we do, the main, I guess, pillars where we try to hit these programs and initiatives can be summarized as outreach in terms of what we do in community involvement, involvement with the schools, academics, so scholarships, donations, programs, and things like that, involvement, speaking engagements, and then everything that we do on the recruitment side, and then retention in terms of mentoring programs and ongoing training. That's one of the main focus, is to offer constant ongoing training, because things are very fast paced and constantly changing. So making sure that, you know, there's a good progression. That's the way that we see it.
I think one good example of the discussion we are having right now also. So I think it's really good to see that the firm is taking all these steps to increase the outreach. So in your role as a part of the Students and Strategy Committee, you often look at student applications. What makes a student application stand out? What are the usual mistakes that a student make in their application? And what feedback would you give to them for improvement?
So I would say, you know, first and foremost, be true to yourself, and what you actually put on your resume will summarize. It's basically your only kick at the can. And what makes, I think, us consider whether a student stands out or not is whether they're outside of the mold. So we're not really looking for a cookie cutter, okay, this person has a certain GPA or the equivalent of this GPA, has this experience, has that experience, is involved in school. I have to say that having sat on the student recruitment committee for a number of years now, there's no one single type of student that we usually hire. We usually basically go for a well-rounded package. So if someone, you know, doesn't have the top grades, but has been working part-time in, you know, interesting areas, or has different types of community involvement or other types of projects going on, that makes for a more well-rounded person. And I think it tells us a lot about that person themselves too. So I think what I try to look at is, you know, how that person can distinguish from the other applications without going, you know, too extreme by saying, you know, things that are right, you know, completely offside. That's not what we're looking for, but we're just trying to look for someone that's authentic, and, you know, being true to themselves. The feedback that I would give is basically, you know, have your resume and package read by close, you know, family members and friends. That helps a lot, just because they know you best. They can tell you where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are and what you should focus on. And yeah, I think that's what it is. And I think the biggest mistake is for students to assume that we're always looking for a specific type of person. And I think that's a wrong assumption. I think if the arguments are there to be presented that, you know, there's a match of desire and of a certain job, and that there's the need for it, and if it's a perfect match in terms of the want and the need, and that we can get there, then that's usually how what we focus on, or what at least I focus on.
This makes a great segue to our next question. When a person has been accepted to the articling position, how can students stand out in their articling term? What are certain tips and tricks to be kept in mind while working to make sure that the best work is delivered?
Yeah, I think making sure that you can do things on your own and take initiative. So basically, you know, the saying of, you know, just figure things out. I had one of my mentors when I first started, you know, I guess we tend to ask questions really quickly without giving it much thought, because we always think, oh, it's easier to just ask the question. He or she will just tell me the answer. But I think it's worthwhile to just take a pause, take 30 minutes, think about it, and then your question will be answered on its own. So I had a mentor that, you know, he would basically tell me, I'm not going to answer your emails if I think that you can answer them yourself. and so if I didn't hear from him after a couple of hours, then I knew that he was trying to challenge me to like think outside the box, and like you can get there on your own and try to problem solve. And so I think what we try to look at in terms of best quality a student can have is trying to be, in French we call débrouillard. The word is, you know, just being able to figure things out on your own, think quickly on your feet, and problem solve. So I think that's a way to stand out. Another way to stand out is just basically communicating. So even if you're not sure about it, at least document your thinking process without, being too elaborate, but at least being concise and short and sweet, just to make it clear that, there has been thought, and presenting those thoughts clearly. That's always super appreciated, because then as, a supervisor, then you read it and you're like, okay, this person has given it a lot of thought, has really, done the background work. Of course, that is the right, you're able to validate. It's like any math problem, right? You can't just ask for what the solution is without showing the details of the problem itself. But once you've figured out that math problem and you set out how you've resolved it, and you've come to the right answer, then it's really easy for someone to validate whether it was right or wrong. So that's kind of the way that I see, a student putting in all of their work and thinking, and trying to summarize it in a concise manner, to us, so that it's, can be properly fact checked and signed off on. So
there's some great advice, Barbara, and we would all love to implement this. Another challenge is working remotely. It has its pros and cons. How can students make better connections at the firm while working remotely? What are some things which Stikeman does to make sure their students feel included, even in a remote working environment?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think we struggle for it. There's some people that actually like the remote working environment, but then there's some periods of time where it could feel isolating. I always suggest to do like check-in calls. Basically, even when, a student feels a little bit left out, it's okay to reach out and not be shy to reach out, to say, or to ask questions, or just, take the initiative to say, hey, can we jump on a call? I'm not sure I understand this. And then it usually helps if you have the camera and you have someone face to face, rather than corresponding by email, which can sometimes, leave things, in the void in terms of interpretation. You're not sure, is that person mad at me? Is this passive aggressive? Sometimes it's just, well, I'm answering really quickly and I forgot to punctuate, or I punctuated too much. I don't know. There's things that can be interpreted in different ways, but I think as soon as you turn on the camera and you use your voice to communicate, and the tone that you take, then some people get a better vibe out of it. And I think that they feel more involved. So that's one thing. Don't be afraid to reach out, because this is your career. This is, you have all of the tools in front of you to shape the path that you want to take. So seize those opportunities. And number two is participate. So Stikeman has done a number of, online virtual events, going from pie making, pizza making, wine tasting, chocolate tasting, tea tasting, all sorts of types of, events that we do online, even online poker for, fake chips and things like that, for bragging rights. My advice is to participate, because the more you are known by other people, the more you will always be at the forefront of their thought. And that they will think of you when something comes up, or if there's a new mandate or file that would be interesting. So I think participation is crucial, because without that, if every person participates, then we have the group vibe, and then the more people that participate, the more we create like this fear of missing out for those that aren't there. And so, we try to highly encourage participation, because there's a reason why there's the effect of team bonding, right? So
it's very interesting to hear all the socials that you mentioned, and then of course the part where visibility is so important. As we head towards the end of our discussion, what are the last parting words of motivation that you would like to tell our internationally trained lawyers to keep them going even when the road seems difficult?
Don't give up. I always say you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. I love that quote, just because you've got nothing to lose, and don't doubt yourself. I think we work in an environment where, especially, with the pandemic and just the evolution of technology, where people can easily hide behind computer screens and we forget this human touch. And then because we're hiding, everyone's behind computers, it could seem isolating. And at times I think that there's, at least in my case, we overthink. We're kind of on our own in our own thinking process. That could lead to certain doubts as to whether we're cut out for this or not. And the truth is, you're given the proper training from early on. So if you've made it this far, it's because you have the tools in your toolbox. It's just to figure out how to best use them. And so don't ever doubt yourself in terms of, which tools to use and how to use them. That's, that's the learning process in the whole thing. But don't sell yourself short. I think that's the advice I would say. Don't second guess yourself. Don't sell yourself short. If you've made it this far, you've got everything you need to succeed. So
thanks a lot, Barbara, for all the amazing advice today. And I'm sure our ITLs will have a lot of great takeaways from this discussion. And with that, we conclude our today's episode of ITL Voices Stikeman series. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you. Bye.